Okay, so I want to thank Kim and CYN for this opportunity. I have to say, when I was reflecting back on this study, that this really is all because of Kim and CYN and all the work they've done with colleges over the years. They've had that policy database and then all the resources and technical assistance to provide support for tobacco controls efforts and policy. And if folks know who I am, I'm such a big data nerd. And so when I saw that policy database, I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. This is something to work with, the data. 115 community colleges there as well. And so when I reached out to them when I was writing the proposals, like, why are some of these community colleges smoke-free and others are not? So, in those conversations, in those early conversations with Kim and also with Katie Moose, who was back then, I mean, they just had such a wealth of knowledge about the nuances and getting the policy adopted and not adopted. And I have to say, I wear this research hat, but I just felt like I was following along in there, and just documenting all their efforts. This research is part of a new investigator award from TRDRP. I do want to acknowledge my study team because it couldn't have been done without them. So folks at ARG, at PHI, and then also our external collaborators, Sang-Ling True at Ohlone College and Eliza Tong at UC Davis. And I have to say, in particular, just having Sang in the community college insights and the tobacco control, as well as Eliza with the tobacco control, has been such a treat, and I've been learning so much. Also, these last 2 years doing these case studies, Sang brought her students along, and these were former Ohlone Community College students, and it was so much fun working with them on this project. So I have to say, I have a lot of slides to share, and I'm just going to be mindful of time. Folks will get a copy of this. So, for those that have skipped, you can always refer back to it. So today we'll go through some of the background info that An and Kim had already presented to, but just to build off of it, like where this research study started. And then also just looking over time, what are those disparities or differences and why some community colleges are smoking tobacco free and others are not. Then we'll go into some case studies and looking at the facilitators and barriers. And then finally, our summary and our next steps. And Dustin will be providing a preview of our report to come out of this research study. So some of this was already mentioned in Kim's presentation, but one of the things I want to emphasize is just why the smoke and tobacco free policy. And An also referred to this as well. We're trying to cultivate this healthy environment where it's not only smoking tobacco free that can help reduce tobacco use among those who are smoking, also access services as well, health services and tobacco cessation services. And so again, the key question here is as of last year, 62% of the colleges are smoking tobacco free, but why is it not 100% similar to all the four-year public colleges? And so again, the needs of community college students, I think most of y'all are familiar with. I mean, but just the rich diversity. Much of them are commuter students who live at home, and so it has a different sense of campus community too. I think also from a health equity lens, right? Folks who are going to the public high schools is smoking tobacco free. If they go on to a four-year public college, is smoking tobacco free. So what happened to these community colleges? So in terms of placing a framework, and I love frameworks as well, I'm applying the social ecological model here. And, the focus is on student tobacco use. How do we reduce that? But for this study, it was also on the smoke and tobacco free policy. So why are some campuses, again, smoking tobacco free and others are not? And I was really interested, again, from that health equity perspective too, in terms of colleges, do colleges with greater resources, or is it because you're in a community that has more or higher smoking? Do those factor in terms of whether or not a college will adopt a policy? So for the first aim, this is sort of the historical lens, looking at the disparities in tobacco-free policy adoption over time. And Kim created a great background of some of the legislative policies, but again, just to reemphasize her point, I mean, community colleges were the early adopters. They were the first to adopt back in 2004. So what I'm showing here is the 10 California community college regions. And then with this bar, each box is its own college, is one individual college. And so you can see over time, in 2004 all the way to 2022, these are how the 71 colleges, the timing of when the community colleges adopted a policy. And just to place some event markers there, the American College Health Association, they came out with their position in 2009. And again, community colleges were, being the innovators and leaders with the policy adoption before then. And then the Health Services Association, California Community Colleges with CYAN, they are a group of student health directors, and they put out their white paper too as well, recommending a tobacco-free policy. And you can see the number of colleges that have implemented it up to 2013. With that, the UCs and the Cal States, one of the key markers here is the 2016 veto by Governor Brown, but even after that, there has been more efforts for colleges to adopt a policy. And then also with the Chancellor's Office, the Board of Governors, making their recommendation, and also the Student Senate too. Here's a more graphical visual presentation by Deidre. She presented by the maps. And so I was curious, hey, if college is in an area with higher smoking prevalence, and you can see that by the darker areas on the map, are they more likely to be to not have a policy? So the red dots here are a lot of colleges that do not have the policy, and the green ones are. But this is back in 2008. So now if we fast forward to 2022, we got definitely a lot more green dots here. But there really still isn't a pattern, from these early things, like what's going on with those that have adopted and those have not adopted. And so that's what we did. We pulled together all these data sources to try to figure out if it's school characteristics, it doesn't matter about the student, the college size, is it the academic outcomes? Maybe it's because it's a better community college, they were more likely to adopt a policy, or is it back to the resources aspect? We also looked at the city or the community in which the college was located. And so these included just the demographics, but also the smoking prevalence in that area. American Lung Association had the city tobacco control policies too, and we tagged that in. We put in retail outlets, thinking about the access too. And so we situated the timing, because that was another thing is, were there differences for those that are adopting earlier versus later? I'm going to skip over some of this analysis, but we ran just looking at each individual college characteristic, and we found like student population size. So these are the check marks that were associated with smoke-free policy adoption. And then we also looked at the community characteristics one by one. So we put them all together in our models, and these were the three strongest factors for predicting a smoke-free policy adoption. So if your college was in a city that had a great tobacco control policy, lots of smoke-free parks, environments, the college is more likely to be smoke-free. Student health fees, which is the colleges, and that was a proxy for health resources for us. And that was also a significant factor. And of course, the technical assistance that CYN was providing. So if colleges received that CYN TA, they're more likely to be smoking tobacco free. And so this is really exciting because it wasn't about, being in a community that had, lots of tobacco outlets or big, higher smoking prevalence. These are things that we can address in terms, especially with resources and providing support. However, we did notice, like with the rural colleges, there were some discrepancies. And so this was back in 2019 when we did this, but only 3 of the rural community colleges were smoke-free compared to 60% of the suburban and the urban ones. And so we dived into the data again, and we're like, okay, what is it about these 3 that makes them different from other ones? And we just didn't really find a consistent pattern. And so there were just things that were missing. Like we had that big data and we're able to run these fancy models, but there's still something missing in these quantitative data. So in thinking about it, and especially the conversations with CYN and our study advisory board, we didn't capture the policy process. And then also the idea of the policy champion or advocate, we didn't have that in our models. What was the college buy-in, the infrastructure, and then also the campus tobacco control efforts on their own. So that led us to diving deeper through some case studies and looking at specifically identifying facilitators and barriers to adopting. And again, I'm taking it from more of that health equity approach. And so really thinking about like the resources that a college may have. So just to recap our framework again, so these were the factors that we found were significant for having or not having a smoke and tobacco-free policy. And so in the next with the case studies, we're also looking at this, but expanding a little bit more. And so what are these resources? What is it about being in the rural region and campus layout? How about access to the local tobacco control lead agencies, the role of CYN, community resources, external fundings. The other key elements too was the policy process and also the norms. So similar to what An was talking about, like what is that ethos, that cultural, the social context in which all this is happening. So we went through and selected colleges by regions. We wanted to get at least one college that had a policy. So it was like, okay, yay, a successful case, but then also a not so successful case. And we ended up with 12 total community colleges. I also wanted to say this was also guided from our, again, from CYN and our study advisory board, who really pointed out also really typical cases that, where the college process would be really interesting and documented, and also these atypical cases as well to highlight in these case studies. So for each campus, we selected up to 3 key informants, and these key informants had to have some connection with either the college or the tobacco policy adoption process. And they ended up either being a community college stakeholder or a community partner, either from the CBO or a local lead agency. In addition, we would do these semi-structured interviews. In addition, we'll ask for supplemental policy materials. In the interviews, we'll go through and just kind of get the sense of like, what is their knowledge about the community college system, their knowledge about tobacco control, and then also walking us through the policy adoption process. And so what were the facilitators and barriers too. From that, we developed our code book, coded the interviews, and conducted thematic analyses. Just a quick note, as we started the case studies in 2020 and we're reaching out to colleges to do key informant interviews, realized there were other folks that were doing key informant interviews too. And it was because there was a group of folks, community-based organizations that had received a CTCP grant and they identified community colleges on their scope of work to work on policy efforts, whether it's policy adoption or policy compliance and enforcement. And of course, the COVID pandemic that also happened during this time. And I have to say, it was really interesting just listening to folks in the interviews about how the colleges responded to the crisis and pivoted and come back. And so it's not a main focus of our analysis, but it does enter in because it put a pause on efforts in the policy adoption efforts. And it was interesting to see how colleges were able to use that opportunity, or it was just too much of a barrier to continue. So these were our 12 colleges. The 2 in the north that we selected was Shasta and Butte. So Shasta with the college and the red dot, and Shasta with the policy in the red dot, and Butte College in the white dot. We had City College of San Francisco and Skyline as our Bay Area. And at the time we recruited Skyline, they did not have a policy, but by the end of the study, they did. In the Central California, it was Merced College with the policy and Allen Hancock without. In the LA area, it was Pierce College, without the policy, and Pasadena City College with the policy. Our 2 Southern California ones ended up not having policy, campuses. And so there's San Bernardino College and Santiago Canyon College. We also wanted to add in that rural case study. And so the two colleges that represented the rural colleges was Feather River and Columbia College. So among our key informants, most of them were either from an external partner, the Tobacco LLA, a county, or the community organization. We had 10 from there, or they're from the Student Health Center. And then in addition, we had 3 that were students, 7 college administrators, and 1 college faculty. So from our themes, these are the key themes for the facilitators. And one of my favorites is the what we're calling the doer. So the doer is similar to the policy champion that you hear about, but they also had these key characteristics of just like knowing how to organize, and also they were the key driver in some of the policy adoption efforts, definitely behind the scenes, and that's why they don't necessarily have to be the policy champion. Some may have been, some may not have been, but they really were that bridge that connected all the key folks on campus. So here's a great quote from Skyline. College faculty is amazing. She has so many different connections. She knows how the district works. Having someone who's very knowledgeable, who's at least willing to put in the time and effort, and has a passion for social justice and also equality or equity. We can go into the next one, which is the external partners. I'm not going to read through all these quotes, but feel free to go through it or afterwards at the slides. And I have to say, after I put down external partners and I was practicing this talk, I was like, you know, this really should be campus community partnerships, because it really takes 2. You really need to have that strong campus partner as well as the external partner. But with this, you know, with the both partners, you know, they're each coming in with their own toolkit. So the campus partners coming in with the knowledge and how to get the policy passed and the key people on campus, and the external partner really bringing in that tobacco control expertise, having the staff and the resources. Oftentimes they would be paying for students' time as well. And what was interesting too is that these partnerships it takes time to collaborate, and it takes time to build in that trust and rapport. And so oftentimes in those initial policy adoption efforts, they'll be like, who is this person coming off campus? And they want to impose this policy on us. And so that really takes some cultivation. But it was really interesting to see the dynamics when it worked well. And then there's the dynamics. And I think it was really because of COVID that put a pause on some of these relationship building. External funding, of course, because community colleges are strapped for money and resources, but many of them did find resources from the local tobacco control departments, especially around cessation, and also the Truth Initiative. One thing that was really interesting with the Truth Initiative or an American Cancer Society grant that was specific to policy, it was that it really, if a community college received that, it almost gave them this like national recognition and the spotlight, but at the same time, also this accountability to get the policy adopted as well. Issue framing was also a great strategy that we saw that partners had used, and it was really how they framed the tobacco policy, but they linked it to the community college, like what would be salient to the community college and their identity. So some would use that public health approach, you know, and the secondhand harms. Others would raise the social justice of peace and making it an equitable environment. So this statement from Pierce College is, you know, the focus on equity and inclusion and creating a safe space for folks. And that definitely ties in with creating space as safe after the pandemic too. So that was also a key strategy that we saw in several of the campuses. Finally, the opportunity, and with any of the policy adoption efforts and policy literatures, having that window of opportunity. And so here, this quote from Columbia College kind of takes it, that describes this one perfectly. It's like, one of the big takeaways I've seen is opportunity meets preparation. During those times when you just can't move forward, hopefully you can still keep some of that flame lit ready. Then when you do have that opportunity, you can pounce on it. So Diane created this great grid to kind of summarize our facilitators here. And so the first 6 colleges are those that do not have a smoking tobacco-free policy. And then the last 6 on the right do have a policy. And you can see, they're mostly, except for the opportunity, most of these colleges had these facilitators, a doer, external partner funding. So going into our second area of barriers, I'm going to go through these more quickly and just highlight the key parts for these. So wildfires was super interesting. I think with climate change and just the increase in heat and the risk of wildfires, and it wasn't just limited to the rural colleges too, but it could be any large campus with dry vegetation and trees. And you would think that the wildfire would be a facilitator for the policy and just getting rid of any possible fire risk from the cigarettes. But because of that liability that if folks go off campus and they could easily start a wildfire, that we ended up highlighting that as a barrier. Community norms as well. And so, the community that the college is around, a lot of times that sense of community would also, or that community norm would also be part of the campus culture too. And so if you think about being in an area with more smoking or vaping, that's likely to also affect the campus as well. And so some of the other key themes or norms that were elevated were individual rights, especially the individual right to smoke, and also not wanting to marginalize those who are smoking. And of course, competing priorities. One of the big things that we kept hearing about, is the focus at these community colleges is learning and teaching and student success. And so how to prioritize tobacco control as an issue that community colleges can embrace. Another key competing priority was the COVID, and we really saw that in the shift with the resources and staffing and really needing to have that commitment to do this work. And so from some of the interviews, you can get a sense of this fatigue, especially from the doers who have been doing this for a long time with tobacco control and just keep hitting those walls. And there was this hesitancy to even start it up again. So I think because of all the rejections and the uphill battle. But again, it goes back to that staffing time and resources, because then when it comes down to them, it's like, well, which issue am I going to choose this year? Is it going to be to take up tobacco control, try to get the tobacco policy passed, or do I want to keep my allies and go for the basic needs instead? And so there was that struggle, especially with the campus stakeholders. So again, when we're looking across the board, all of the colleges, even the ones that have passed a policy, had these competing priorities. Some of the community norms do weigh heavier for those that did not pass the policy. And then for some of the schools that did have a policy, they were able to flip it and use that community norm to their advantage too. Okay, so my final set of results here, and these were the items that were both facilitators and barriers. So one of the key is the turnover, especially with students, especially at 2-year colleges, students are staying longer, but still that turnover in any of the leadership, whether it's that student advocate, we had a number of student health directors that were retiring when we were doing this. And so not having that continuity to keep the policy efforts was a key barrier. For leadership, it can be both a facilitator and barrier. We definitely saw it more as a barrier when you do not have those supportive leaderships. But when they were there and they were for the policy, then it definitely made for a smoother process. The policy process too. I think I've learned so much about just community college governance and having to go through each of the boards, whether it's the student senate, academic senate, then board of trustees. It really takes that time to go through that. And then also the politicking as well. The other aspect too is if a college was part of a multi-campus district. And so if you're doing all these efforts on your own campus and you get up to that district board, they're going to be asking about the other campuses too. And so how to use that as a benefit, or in some cases, like in Santiago College ended up being a barrier in terms of they had made all these efforts, and then they needed to get their sister campus on board before they can move forward. And finally, external pressures as well. And so these are, again, like could be both a facilitator and barrier too. So just to wrap this part up, you can really see with these themes, most of the ones were barriers for those that do not have a tobacco-free policy. And then for those that especially the leadership piece, for those that have a policy, they were facilitators. So just to wrap this part up, I know there's a lot out there, so I'm going to try to summarize it in a succinct way. But before I do that, I do want to note a limitation on our case studies, that it was limited to only 12. I'm sure if you were to do another set of 12, it would be different stories, different processes, and it may have some similarities across the way, but I think there's just so many nuances here with the community colleges. I think also another key limitation is who was willing to talk to us too, and they're definitely more likely the ones that had positive experiences, and those that were compared to those that may have been more in opposition to the policy, may not have wanted to participate in our interviews. So just to summarize the learnings from this study, community colleges are a very unique setting, and it's something that we have to consider as we move forward, and things that both Kim and An had also alluded to is this shared governance process. You have 73 college districts, especially, and the nuances between a single campus district versus a multi-campus district, and also the turnover with students and administrative leadership. I think in our first part, where we were looking just across the board at the 114 campuses at the time, you know, I was trying to figure out some systematic way to be like, yeah, we're going to find the key factors, right? And so we did see those colleges in cities with stronger tobacco policies that were smoking tobacco free. And then especially having those resources, the student health fee as a proxy for health resources, and also CYAN. But still, there's still so much nuances. Like I don't know if this is like can be our single recommendation, right? Because they're from the case studies, there are also different pathways in which people were able to adopt a policy. And so for those 6 colleges that were 100% smoking tobacco free, I mean, I'm elevating these 3 key strategies, but there may have been others that we did not capture. And this is where the panel discussion that's coming up next will be helpful too. But having the external funding, the issue framing, and the supportive leadership. But for each of these 6, I mean, they had different starting points. We have these roadmaps that we developed, and you know, it's kind of all over the place for some of them. I think the other key point is how long it took to adopt a policy for some folks, and they had different campus and external partners. So some were led by a student health center lead, others by the student services part. So things to consider. But to sum up this part, it was really that window of opportunity. We saw the strong doer, the campus community partnerships that really mattered. And it's not to say that the 6 colleges who are not yet smoking tobacco free, they also had the doers. They also had the external partners and funding. And I think even though they may not be at the 100% tobacco free, there were movement there and then commitment there to at least do something about tobacco control. Some of them did reduce the number of designated smoking areas, put better signage on campus, but still there's such a huge number of barriers, and also that lack of opportunity, unsupported leadership, competing priorities, the turnover, and then the policy process as well. I did want to make a note about the timing. And so if things were set up where these colleges had the doer, the external partner, and the funding, but then something happens to block it, whether it's COVID or the doer or a lead policy champion steps away or retires, it's almost like they have to start from scratch when the time comes up or the opportunities come up again too. So recommendations and next steps. How do we get the remaining community colleges tobacco-free? And this is where I'm really excited to see where CYN is having those workshops coming up to figure out regionally, how do we make this happen? And so for us, we are working on an action plan or report of policy strategies to support them. We also want to recommend continuing to collect and track data relevant to tobacco control, especially student tobacco use, whether it's through the Healthy Mind Survey or Achanacha, screening, intervention, cessation services, and policy adoption and compliance. Strengthening those campus and community partnerships. I know some of the CTCP grantees, the funding had come to an end, but how do we continue this so we can have those and provide that support? And then also policy advocacy from the bottom up and the top down. So I'm going to stop share here and switch over to Dustin. And Dustin's been awesome in terms of him and Diane are creating these roadmaps and making all this data more digestible. So go ahead, Dustin.
So hi, everyone. So we chose to create an interactive report. This is an effort to create cater to multiple audience and give the reader the option to engage with the report in different ways. They'll have the choice if they want to take a more of a deeper dive into the policy journey of each campus and learn about the different strategies they utilized, or they can just read the executive summary and then skip down to the key findings and lessons learned. We often joke that we took a choose your own adventure approach when developing this resource. As you can see from the table of contents, it's broken down into 5 different sections. For the sake of time, I'm only going to speak to the policy roadmaps for today. So, as you can see on the screen, the report gives you the option to select from 12 different campuses across the state. Today, we're going to cover the Feather River's policy process. So each section begins with a brief overview about the college and provides a quick background that covers the tobacco landscape in the college. So on the following page, we mapped out Feather River's individual path in becoming a 100% smoke and tobacco-free campus. The roadmap is broken down by year and highlights the different opportunities, roadblocks, challenges, and key partnerships along the way. And if you hover your mouse over each section, you can learn more about each event. To start, you can see that the campus had a strong collaboration with the Plumas County Public Health Agency and also made a strong commitment early on to go tobacco-free by 2021. As you move through the map, you'll notice there's 2 events: the Paradise Fire in November of 2018 and the start of the COVID pandemic in 2020. These events really greatly challenged the college's priorities about the time, changed the college's priorities. There are a few other major notable events in 2021. These include receiving a 5-year grant from the California Health Collaborative and the formation of the Tobacco-Free Task Force, which, as you'll notice from the identified key players, it was comprised of students, staff, and faculty, and the CA Health Collaborative. Finally, you'll notice there are 2 events that occur after the policy was passed in May of 2021. This is to showcase how enforcement and compliance are very much part of the policy journey. The next page provides different data points about the school, including the student population, the racial and ethnic distribution, the age breakdown of the students, campus health resources, as well as various challenges the college faced and key strategies that were employed. We also included some supplemental material and different citations as pop-ups for the map. So we ended each section with key takeaways from each campus. What made their policy process unique, what worked, what were the main barriers. It also unpacks a few events in the roadmap in a little more detail. Embarrassingly, you will notice on this page from a few obvious placeholders, this report is still a work in progress, and we are still putting together a few of the final touches. So in closing, we just hope this report can act as both a resource and a tool for colleges and community partners to build on their policy action plans and learn about different strategies they might be able to utilize in their own campuses or in their own communities, and a resource for public health practitioners and individuals working in the field who are interested in tobacco policy. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Amelia, and we are going to open it up for questions.
Thanks, Dustin. It's been such an exciting process working with people that are a little bit more data visualization instead of, I'm just used to focusing on numbers, but both Dustin and Diane have just brought the findings alive in a way that I never expected. So really excited. We'll be launching that by this summer. So I think I want to conclude going back to Columbia College's quote. And again, it's like, community colleges have been putting all this effort into policy adoption, time, resources, and in some cases they're successful, in other cases they're not quite there yet. And so I think, again, one of the big takeaways, I'll read off this quote again, is the opportunity meets preparation. And so with that, I do want to acknowledge all the key informants and community colleges that were participants in this study, and especially our study advisory board, including Kim, CYN, Katie Moose from California Health Collaborative, and other folks as well. We couldn't have done this without you. So we want to thank you all, and we'll open it up to questions too. And we're really excited for the next part too, because as we're wrapping this up and we're making those recommendations and strategies, we're like, oh, we're not really in the field, but that's where having folks and having this space here to really incorporate those findings. We would love to get this out back up to the Chancellor's office and whatever ways we can to support systems change for community colleges.
It looks like we have Ignacio in the chat with the question.
Oh, thanks, Ignacio. So with Skyline College, did we see any interesting data appear during their transition to the smoke-free campus? That one, since it was happening in real time, it was actually quite exciting to just see the campus efforts and their organizing with the external partner. We had a similar case study with City College of San Francisco that had a really strong partnership, but here we ended up just capturing that live on the ground process. In terms of the data that we found, I think some of it wasn't fast enough. So like, whether it was like the area level community tobacco use, like it just wasn't fast enough to keep pace with it. So oftentimes these data come out a couple of years later. And so we weren't able to leverage it in a way that that could have been probably more supportive for the policy, but it was more about the interviews and just what was happening on the ground. I hope they answer your question.
And Camelia, can I just speak really fast to Skyline? I think one of the interesting things, I think this will come out in the panel that we hear from next specifically with community college work, is that there's no linear path to doing it. It's all over the place. And it's difficult to know if if something will lead you to a complete roadblock or if something will just fly open and change everything. And with Skyline, what was fascinating about that is Skyline is part of the San Mateo Community College District, which is home to 3 colleges in different communities within the Bay Area. And there was a CTCP funded organization who unfortunately is no longer funded to work within tobacco control after April 30th, but they were leading the work with Skyline specifically, and had a phenomenal faculty partner, had recruited student partners to lead the work at the campus level. And through that process and just exploring what needed to be done at the district level, had found some leaders within the district who had decided that they were really interested in doing something district-wide instead of doing something at the campus level, which the community colleges within that district could do. And so they had to shift very quickly their focus on a one campus advocacy effort to doing a district-wide advocacy effort, which was very successful. The faculty lead from Skyline was instrumental in doing this advocacy work, and that led to a full change for that district. So it was fun to really watch how they did this. And then I just also want to call out that one of the things that we're always really concerned about as a community partner is that we don't just go in and develop partnerships, pass policies, and then walk away. That this is really a long-term relationship that we can offer and provide support through implementation and compliance. And one of the things that the organization who led the policy work at Skyline and then later at San Mateo Community College District did that's so phenomenal is that knowing that they were going to be losing funding, they have been working very closely with Breathe California Bay Area to transition in and step in and to continue to provide that implementation and compliance support for all of the campuses, even though the San Francisco Community Clinic is no longer doing that work. So it's just a great, not only great partnership and advocacy, but great stewardship going forward and really showing that strong connection and good faith. So just a shout out to all of the people who were involved in that process.
Awesome. And with that, we'll head into the panel, learning lessons from community college advocates. So if you'd all join me in welcoming Amanda, Chelsea, and Katie. The way we'll start off is we'll have a brief share out from each one of the partners, and then we'll head into the slate of questions.
Okay, so thank you all so much for joining today. And we all know you, but I don't know that everybody here knows you. So Amanda, if you could just start introducing yourself and then sharing the work that you've done with the campuses, and then we'll go on to the next couple of speakers.
Perfect, sounds great. So my name is Amanda Berryhill, pronouns she, her. I am the project director for the Smoke-Free High Country project. It is a project of the California Health Collaborative. Our project works with College of the Siskiyous, Lansing Community College, and Feather River College. We're going to focus today's talk on Feather River College because they went smoke and tobacco free just a little while ago. And so thank you again for having me. It's exciting to be here and get to kind of share our story and our process. One of the most important things I want to share about working with colleges is that every process is different, like Kim was just saying. And it may not happen in the way that you expect. It certainly hasn't been that way for us. We work with these 3 different schools, and it's been a very different process trying to move forward with smoke and tobacco-free policies for each school. We began our project in July of 2020, which you can imagine wasn't the easiest time to start a new project in rural towns where we didn't actually know anyone. One of the counties we knew people because I lived there, but the other 2 we were brand new to, so it took a lot of organization and trying to connect with people. So in 2020 through 2021, we supported Feather River College in going smoke-free. That was sort of the timeline to get the policy passed. However, we continue to work with them regularly for implementation, and I'll get into that a little later. They officially became smoke and tobacco free as of July 2021. We continue to support them through implementation. There's a lot of work that we still do with them on a regular basis, and we plan to for the future. This campus, I always say, was special compared to some of the others that we've worked with. They had this plan, Camellia shared that they had listed in documentation on their website that they would be smoke-free by 2020. So this was a great time for us to start this conversation back up. We knew there had been some tobacco advocacy prior to our project beginning, but we didn't really know where it came from or who those contacts were. We assumed it was the LLA because we didn't know of any other tobacco funding, like CBOs like ourselves, that had worked in the area. But there had been like a lot of turnover at public health, and so we weren't exactly sure where that came from, and what exactly had been done. But luckily, with this goal of being smoke and tobacco free by 2020, they had an administrator listed. It was just their title, and that they were sort of responsible for this. When we originally reached out to them, this person wasn't really sure why they were listed, but they really, really took on the challenge and was absolutely instrumental in making this policy happen. We began with recruitment for an advocacy work group. And we also hired a student as a college coordinator. Now, I'll say we had funding to hire a college coordinator at every school, and Feather River was the only one that bit, and that we were actually to get any sort of applicants for. We really struggled with this at the other schools. So I think having the college coordinator doing a lot of the advocacy on campus made a huge difference, and part of the reason why Feather River was able to move forward so quickly. He did presentations, like peer-to-peer presentations to his classes, and he spoke with the nursing director, which gained us a lot of support. Through the administrator, we also gained support from the student body president. At this point, the policy began moving through the system. We first received approval from the student government. The next was the academic senate, and that's kind of where we hit some speed bumps. They brought up some concerns, but were willing to hear solutions. And in all my years of working in tobacco, sometimes people aren't willing to hear solutions. So this was really exciting about the school that they wanted to hear us out. So we weren't actually present at any of these meetings. Most of the time we didn't even know that they happened until after the fact. So we weren't there to respond to any issues. We just kind of had to catch up afterwards and figure out how we change the conversation in a positive way. But at one point we were given a list of concerns from the academic senate, and we were able to write sort of a rebuttal to each one. The two biggest things that we had to overcome were the wildfire concern that you've heard mentioned before, and trying not to alienate any students who smoke, especially because it is often used as a coping mechanism. And so I think we'll have an opportunity to dive into that in the question section. So I won't get into how we overcame those right now. But we also, so the rebuttal that we wrote, we gave to the administrator, and they disseminated it however they felt best. When we invited the academic, next we invited the academic senate to a work group meeting that we were having regularly, sort of like our college task force, and they were able to address some specific concerns with us on Zoom and kind of hash out some issues that reasons why they were against this policy. They were very open to hearing us out, which was really important. The individuals later even joined some of our task force trainings, which was really great to see. And what was a little strange to us was that the academic senate never actually voted again. We weren't really expecting that, and that's okay. That's how their campus process worked. And it all turned out fine. It was just interesting because we don't really have an answer whether our responses and our rebuttal to their concerns changed their minds. But they did continue to participate with us, so we are hoping that that was a positive thing. So instead, this policy moved to the cabinet where it was approved. And the cabinet basically was able to override that no that originally came from the academic senate. And it wasn't a hard no, it was just we need some more information before we're able to say yes, but they never voted again. And so the last step was to bring it to the Board of Trustees. If they approve the policy, then it would be final. So I actually got to join that meeting over Zoom. This is still kind of pandemic time, so everything was on Zoom. And I offered just one single slide showing how our project was going to support the next steps after the policy was passed, because that seemed to be a concern for the campus was, are we just going to pass a policy to pass a policy and then do nothing about it? Or how are we going to support our students and making this policy actually do what it's supposed to, which is to help individuals that are addicted to tobacco and to, reduce secondhand smoke, of course. And so also during that meeting, the administrator that was our sort of policy champion explained sort of the campus effort, the process that we had been through to getting to this point. And the board of trustees asked if there was student support to this. They turned over to the student body vice president because the student body president wasn't available for this meeting. And though she hadn't actually been to any of our task force meetings or participated in any of our events, she said that while she wasn't directly involved, she knew that there was a lot of support for students. And that was all the board of trustees needed, and they unanimously voted yes to pass the policy. That was our exciting process with Feather River College. It has not been the same for any of our other schools, but it was really interesting kind of learning how it's going to work for this school and being patient along the way, trying to, well, isn't this step supposed to happen before this step? We just kind of had to go with the flow and react and respond in the best way that we could to help it move forward. And that's all for me.
Thank you for that insight. And then we'll go ahead and move into YCCD as well as Columbia and MJC with Chelsea and Katie.
Okay, we have a couple of slides, so I think Chelsea is going to get those on the screen for us. So Chelsea and I and Amanda, we all work together actually. We all work at California Health Collaborative, but Amanda is way up there in the North State, and Chelsea and I work out of our Sacramento office. We work in the Gold Country region. We're a rural regional grantee from California Tobacco Control Program. So we're gonna kind of tag team this part about our work with the Yosemite Community College District. So go to the next slide. Thanks. Okay, so the Yosemite Community College District includes 2 campuses, Modesto Junior College, which itself has 2 campuses, and that's in Stanislaus County. And it's a pretty big campus with a big student population. And then Columbia Community College, which is in Tuolumne County, very small campus, very small student population. And I want to start out by saying neither of these actually has a policy yet. So we are actually, not quite yet celebrating that one of these or both of these has gone actually smoking tobacco free yet. We're really close with Modesto Junior College, but still just not quite there. So we're going to talk a lot about the challenges because we started working with these campuses in 2019. So it's been like 4 years now. We're still not there yet. So we've definitely encountered a bunch of challenges along the way. So we'll talk about all about that. We found out right away when we first started that there were previous efforts to make both of these campuses smoke and tobacco free. And we were able to get in touch with those advocates on each campus. So at MJC, Modesto Junior College, it was a faculty member who had been advocating for this for a number of years actually at that campus. And he was really well connected. He served on the facilities council, which we've seen facilities councils exist at many campuses that we've worked at. And a lot of times they want a policy like this to go through the facilities council. So it was really great that he served on the facilities council and was actually president of the facilities council. At Columbia, the advocate that we got in touch with was the director of the Student Health Center. And she had been trying to get that campus to go smoke and tobacco free for many, many years. She's since retired from there. She actually had gotten a Truth Initiative grant at Columbia College a few years back and had gotten pretty far actually with getting the campus to adopt a policy, but just was kind of rebuffed at the very end by the faculty senate, and they just didn't want to do it, and those efforts just kind of fell apart. So once we got these advocates, we started a task force for both campuses to work together. We provided the logistics for the task force, but it was really run by that professor, that advocate at Modesto Junior College. He really was kind of the leader of this effort since he had been really spearheading it, before we even got there. So he led the task force meetings. He kind of called the shots and ran the show, and we just provided support. It did get a little frustrating because from our perspective as an outside organization with a grant and deadlines and things that we wanted to happen, things moved so slow. And we were meeting as a task force every other week. And I have to say, sometimes those meetings, it was just felt like nothing was happening, like no movement was being made in terms of like going through the shared governance process. And our leader, the professor, he was great. And honestly, he's the only reason I think that we've gotten so far as we have with Modesto Junior College. But what was frustrating for us is like he wanted to be the one who talked to all the shared governance bodies, who talked to all the decision makers on campus. So he was kind of freezing us out of the process a bit. All we could do was just help him run his task force meetings, and he was kind of doing everything else. And it was going really slowly. He was really busy. He was involved in all these other efforts as well. So, it took a long time. So another thing I wanted to bring up was that at both campuses, we had a lot of good success getting student government leaders on board. So at Modesto Junior College, we were able to get a resolution of support from the associated students within just a couple of months, like they were ready to support this. At Columbia, we hired 2 student senators as interns to work with us on this. And at Columbia, things got slowed down because at that point, after we hired the interns, we wanted to do a survey, and we were directed to work with their campus office of research. And that really slowed things down. They wanted the survey to have questions worded the way that they wanted to do it. We were going back and forth on that, and then COVID happened. And ultimately, the survey never got released at all, so that we never were able to do a survey at Columbia. Whereas at Modesto, we did the survey before the pandemic, just in person, just at in-person events. We didn't work with any campus people on that. We just had our iPads and would just go and talk to people and get surveys that way. So that's how we were able to get those surveys done at MJC, but not at Columbia. Long story short, ultimately at Modesto Junior College, it was the leadership of that professor who was spearheading it. He eventually got it through the shared governing process, which was incredibly long. It had to go through each voting body 2 times, and ultimately to the college council. I think it took about 3 years altogether for that to happen. And then it still had to go to the district. So after all of that, and the president finally signs it, everybody's on board at Modesto Junior College. The way that the district policy is written, it basically says, the campuses can't decide for themselves what they want to do. This is a district policy. So now MJC had to go to the district and say, hey, we want to do this. Can you change your district policy to give us the power to make our own decision about whether we want to go tobacco free? And then I'll let Chelsea tell you about that in a sec. But at Columbia, we were able finally to get the student senate to support a resolution and adopt a resolution of support. But ultimately, it didn't seem to matter that we had student support for this issue. The president of the campus and the faculty senate did not support going tobacco free. They did reduce the number of designated areas that they had on campus, so that's good. One of the main concerns from them was the fire risk. We tried to provide information about how possibly a tobacco-free policy would actually reduce the risk of fire for them, but it just seemed like nothing that we said would convince them otherwise. They also had concerns about staff going off campus to smoke and having to drive and taking too long of breaks and stuff like that. But ultimately, after attending a few of their academic senate meetings, I really think it wasn't necessarily these specific concerns that they were bringing up. It was more the kind of, I really think it was the political ideology of just a couple of the faculty senate members who had that kind of libertarian, like we shouldn't be telling people what to do, people should be able to do what they want kind of mindset. And they were just really loud, you know, so like at every meeting, they would just be in the chat, they would make comments. And even though there was only a couple of them, and we knew that there was a lot of actual support, including from the president of the academic senate on this, support from many of faculty members that we had worked with over the years, support from the students, they weren't supportive enough or passionate enough, I guess I would say, to like go head to head with these loud people who were just speaking up and all over the place. They weren't willing to like argue with them in the academic senate meeting, or you know, just really go to head with them. They supported it, but maybe just not enough to you know, try to work with the naysayers. So that's where we're at with the two campuses, and then I'll let Chelsea talk about the work at the district level.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Chelsea King. I work with Katie at the Health Collaborative. I actually started with Katie in their young adult coalition called YAFT, and now I'm working with them, and I'm a coordinator of the young adult coalition. And that's kind of where we start, is with YAFT. We now knew we had to work with the district, and so we needed to make a big impact. We needed to make big change to get them to notice us and get to hear our voices. And so the first thing we did was to recruit YAF members from both colleges, from Columbia and MJC. This picture is from our last YAF retreat. There's a few students in there that are from both Columbia and MJC, some past students. We had to do a lot of recruitment. The board and a lot of decision makers want to hear from young adults. They want to hear from people who are on that campus, who go to that school. They want to hear from their students. And so that was the first thing we did, was to recruit for YAFT and help these students become a part of the movement. Next, which I think was also really impactful, was we did a cleanup. I don't think a lot of people think about this when working with colleges, but this was really impactful. We did a cleanup at MJC, and just to show the environmental impact that cigarette butts have on their campus and their community. And ultimately, we collected 986 cigarette butts. And what we did with this was, me, along with a couple other YAF members, went to the district. We went during public comment, and we brought the canister of cigarette butts with us. And we made them guess how many cigarette butts we collected. And so that definitely stayed with them. They even mentioned it in future public comments that they remember that, they remember the cigarette butts, they remember how many were in there. And so I think it made a big impact on them, and seeing how detrimental tobacco is to their environment and their campus community. And so that was one of the major things we did there. The next thing was obviously public comments. That is super important. And I have a public comment here from one of our YAF members, which I will play at a board meeting for the district. So I'll go ahead and play it so you guys can hear. Next, I have Morgan Haydock. And thank you so much for your time. My name is Morgan Haydock. I'm a student at Advocacy Junior College. I'm speaking to you tonight to urge you to pass the proposed new smoking policy that would allow campuses to ban smoking. In the time that I've been at MJC, I've been exposed to secondhand smoke more times than I can count. At MJC, you can't sit at a bench or a picnic table without inevitably getting engulfed by cigarette smoke or vape smoke. Consistently throughout my time at MJC, it has been myself and my peers who have had to leave outdoor spaces on our own campus because there's no policy in place to protect our health. It's not fair that a majority of the student population does not smoke, but still has to suffer the consequences that smoking can bring in order to accommodate those who do.
I think we can all agree that students should be able to get their education in a healthy environment. Right now, only students at UCs and CSUs are guaranteed a smoke-free campus. The health of students at those colleges is more worthy of protection than that, I hope, in 5 years. Tonight, you're going to hear from several people who are going to talk about the harmful health impacts of smoking and the impacts that a smoke-free policy has. We all know secondhand smoke can harm non-smokers. We all know that smoking is linked to cancer. We all know that smoking is not safe and it is not healthy. So I'm not here to cite statistics or give you more facts. We know them already. I'm asking you to take action. It is time that the colleges in the Yosemite Community College District have the right to protect their students' health. I ask that you please vote for the new smoking policy so that all students can have a safer and healthier. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we did a lot of public comments, and leading up to the final vote, basically when we were working with the district, there were two potential policies. There was a smoke-free policy, 100% smoke-free for both campuses, or there was a policy that would basically allow each campus to decide what they would like to do. Ultimately, the district was leaning towards letting each campus decide which policy they want to do, so they decided to vote on that policy. Columbia had reservations about going smoke-free, as Katie said, because of fire risk. MJC has been wanting to go smoke-free for a very, very long time. And so a lot of us went and did public comment at this meeting where they voted on the policy, and ultimately they passed it. And I was going to show a clip of some of their comments, but just so we can make sure we have enough time, this video is kind of long, so I was just going to give you a summary of some of the comments the board said. One board member believed that this policy did not go far enough. He wanted both campuses to be 100% smoke-free, and he really, really was an advocate for both campuses going smoke-free. But unfortunately, the other board members made comments on how this was something that each campus should decide on their own. So ultimately, they did vote for this policy to pass. It was a win for us. We really, really needed this. And so now each campus can decide for themselves which policy they want to do and if they'd like to go forward with a smoke-free policy. And as we said, MJC's been wanting to for a really long time. So they are currently working towards that. And Columbia is not at the moment, but we will continue to work with them. And so I think that's the end of our presentation. Katie, do you want to add anything else, or?
No, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you for that overview and the history of the work that you guys have done and what has been accomplished on these campuses so far. I can only expect to see the best moving forward. And we'll go ahead and segue into the question panel. So we'll go ahead and start off with the first question being, would you be able to highlight some of the success that you found in your work?
I think some of the concerns that we had, I really enjoyed getting over those. The responses that we had and the response that we got from everyone was very positive, I think. Like I said, we still don't really know because they never voted again if that was to work, but just getting to have that sort of individual discussion with people and really realize how little people know about the harms of tobacco. Because we work in this field, we think everybody knows just how dangerous secondhand smoke is, but there's still some people that don't think it's harmful outdoors. And so kind of getting to really learn that and overcome those, getting the chance to really educate those individuals that were previously very against a tobacco policy was really rewarding. And that because we were ultimately successful. I think if we weren't, it would have been frustrating. But in that situation, I enjoyed that part of it. I think it was exciting to see that change in people's mindset when they receive the education.
And I'll just add for successes, of course, getting somebody on campus, as Amanda was talking about, right? You, as an outside organization, you have to have people on campus that are working with you on this. Otherwise, you're never going to get anywhere. And we were lucky, just honestly lucky, that there were already people on our campuses that cared about this issue. But I will also say, for anybody who's working with a nonprofit and is trying to gain those campus connections, we also have some success gaining those connections through the student government. So I would recommend like going to student government, asking to get on their agenda, introducing yourself to them. And if you have any stipends and can offer them student internships, getting them, paying them to work with you on this project was a really good way for us to get in.
Yeah, for me, I would say the biggest successes were seeing the students become advocates for their campus community. That was amazing, to give them the tools to become leaders and become the health advocates that they wanted to see in their community. It was a really good feeling. I think that was some of our biggest success.
I want to just note, Katie, I appreciate what you all shared, but Katie, I think the suggestion of not only working with student government, but creating a connection to student government and also inviting them to have a paid internship or for them to share that opportunity is such a great way of kind of knocking down some walls and in an undercover way getting their support. So that's a really brilliant tactic. But then also, like what you were saying, Chelsea, such a really good opportunity as well for those young people who have already self-identified as being interested in leadership and government and policy to then get that hands-on experience through the work that you all are doing in partnership with the college. I think that is awesome. I have a follow-up question, and then we have a question too. So I'll go to Jocelyn in just a second, but I'm interested to know, I've heard you all talk about fire danger has come up a lot. There was mention of doing cigarette butt cleanups, and then also some concerns with secondhand smoke outdoors. One of the challenges we're seeing right now, just with the population as well, with compliance issues, is we're transitioning to these young people who are vaping more on campus than they are smoking. So have you seen that change in behavior, either positively impacting the policy work because there's less fire danger associated with vaping devices, or has it created kind of more of a hardship because there's now the normalization of vaping on campus?
I just have a thought in response to that, which is our biggest barrier was the faculty senate or academic senate, I forget what they call themselves, at Columbia College, which is rural, heavily forested, huge fire danger there. They brought up the fire thing a lot. But something that's kind of weird or funny is this is a committee that's full of professors, right? There's no students on that committee, except for they might have a student representative, who are older. They're all older folks. They don't even necessarily realize how much vaping is actually happening, or the extent of that transition from smoking to vaping. I think they kind of like live in their world. They're not in tobacco control like us, so they don't know all of the new stuff that's happening. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure that they've noticed, kids vaping on campus for sure, but I don't know if because vaping didn't come up very much during the discussions. They just kept talking about smoking, and kids, they're going to smoke whether you want them to or not, and they're going to go into the forest and they're going to light a fire. So I think they just didn't realize as much as that there's actually like not as many students smoking. But I will say smoking rates are a lot higher actually in that county. So there are actually a lot of people still smoking. There are a lot of people vaping, yes, but their smoking rates are higher there as well. So that's my thoughts on that.
With Feather River College, we squashed it so fast that I don't know if that was even like the vaping was really a discussion. The fire thing came up once, we gave a response, and it was gone after that. So I'm not sure exactly if we changed their minds, or if there was some external discussions going on that we weren't a part of with the fire danger. but it was a very quick change of heart. With one of our other schools, they haven't brought up the fire thing, but I've been really preparing for it because they are in like covered in pine trees in a really rural area. And so when we did our cleanup at that campus, the cigarette butts people brought me were filled with pine needles, which are incredibly flammable. So I think we're kind of like prepared for that argument if it does come up, is that you have a fire risk with people smoking on campus or off campus. Because they're already putting their cigarette butts into the pine needles and whatnot. And so, yeah, with the vaping, I think the only comment I've really heard is that with some of the campuses, well, we don't really see people smoking on campus, but who's going to go to a designated smoking area to vape, right? That's kind of been the conversation. So I don't know how that really plays into the fire for that school because they haven't brought it up yet. But those are just some of the like responses that we get from people when they talk about seeing people smoking, where they're smoking, and vaping as well. So.
Awesome. And then we'll go ahead and take a question from the audience. So we'll have Jocelyn unmute and then pose her question.
Hello, my name is Jocelyn. I'm the program associate at CYAN, and I'm actually currently researching the policies for the colleges so that we can begin to start our report card that we usually do. And it's funny because I've actually been stuck on MJC for quite some time because I didn't know what was going on there. Same thing with Columbia, like we had Columbia scored a bit higher, well, actually much more higher than MJC. And when I would look at the district policy, I'd see that they left it up to the campus to decide, right? So then I would go on the campus website and I would, search up smoking, tobacco, smoking policy, smoke free, like all the key words. And still it all led back to that district policy. So right now I'm just really confused, kind of lost at where they stand with their smoking policies, since, it's up to them now to create a policy. So would you all be able to lend me some insight so I can, grade them correctly? I don't know if you have, if they are different, if you know where they stand, each of those, the MJC and Columbia, just to have a better understanding of their current policy.
Yeah, so Columbia still has designated areas. They just reduced the number, but they still have a few designated areas. MJC, they haven't, I think until it's on their website and they post signs and stuff, they haven't actually passed their policy yet. That's why I started the presentation with like, we actually don't have a policy yet. So even though they have said that they want to do a policy and now the district has given them permission to do a policy, they actually haven't done the policy yet. So they still get a D or an F or whatever they have because they don't even have an official designated areas policy. So
gotcha. Okay, so yeah, when I'm looking at the differences, I'm like, how can they be under the same district but then be so far apart? And now it's, it's up to them. So hopefully that happens soon. I can only cross my fingers. So, but yeah, thank you so much for that.
And just following up from that, I think one of the things watching the work that you all have done within the Yosemite Community College District, I know that efforts prior to the pandemic with the task force and even kind of through were really, really strong with that task force. And then unfortunately, we saw this not just at MJC or at Columbia. This is an issue that's really hit community colleges hard. There's been significant staff turnover, which has also resulted in a lot of our staff champions turning over, which has been a huge struggle. But what's YAFT and what is your organization, Katie, doing right now that the district policy has changed to help MJC get back to having these conversations?
Well, we're not in a good place right now, honestly. That faculty champion who made all this happen, he retired a while ago, actually before the district even did their vote. So he's not there anymore to really keep everyone on board. And so we've lost that connection really with the campus. We have the connection with the health center, but the health center staff, they don't want to as much get involved in the political side of it. They just want to be there to provide cessation and support services when the time comes. So we've been emailing, YAF students have been emailing, I've been emailing, and just, you know, different administrators that we kind of know have been involved and stuff, and they just haven't been responding to us. So I don't know what's going to happen. We're going to keep trying to reach out to them, but not sure where we're at, and our grant is coming to an end soon. So yes, where we're at.
Yeah, our YAF coalition is trying to put some pressure on them still, sending emails. They're forming a college committee so they can keep them accountable. So hopefully they'll get a policy in place soon. We're hoping for the best.
Thank you. And I just want to make an observation too on the work that Chelsea and Katie are doing, specifically in Stanislaus County. When things went to the district, I think we focused a lot on having partnerships with the colleges, but it was really cool to see you all not only have the partnership with the colleges, but also get into a partnership with the County Office of Education, who has a really strong youth movement in Stanislaus County. And many of those young people are going to be students at MJC, and really making it a whole community initiative and effort. And it was neat to see so many different partners involved in that district work. So just great. It was really cool to see all of that connection there. So just turning back to Amanda, you have done really great work at Feather River College. And we had already talked about not just working towards the adoption of a policy, but supporting that campus beyond that adoption. And you had briefly touched on in your introduction that the school is working on implementation or has done implementation. So can you just dive a little bit further into what implementation looked like and how your relationship with the college still continues today? What kind of support you're offering them post the policy adoption and implementation phase?
Yeah, absolutely. So to start off, it was signage. We created these, what ended up being absolutely gigantic, like 6-foot signs that we had all over campus. They were like banners, and they just said, you know, celebrating that this campus is now going to be smoke and tobacco free. And we got really good feedback that people really enjoyed seeing those signs. And it was just like a in your face, this is the new deal on this campus. Instead of us just putting up the smaller metal signs right away, we had those really big ones that kind of announced it to everybody who was currently already on campus. And so that was just sort of like that big introduction to start with implementation. And these are all things that are grant funded, so that there wasn't any financial burden on the college. And then of course, we eventually had the metal signs put up and the designated smoking areas or any of the like ashtrays removed, which took a little bit of time. So part of that was us just being the person on top of facilities to take that burden off of campus staff, and then to really like post up all over campus the new change. And so that was the big thing to start. We also worked with the health center. We provided a training on sort of like a ask, advise, refer, but we also did a motivational interviewing training for the health center or the wellness center's staff to provide tobacco treatment. And then we gave them resources such as like places to quit. We have, I believe it's from CYN, is, you know, all these different like text or app services to help people that are interested in quitting. And then we worked with like the students, like ASB and the student advocates. I can't remember what their faction is called, but anyways, they did a lot of like promotion on if you want to quit, here's where you can go, kind of pushing people to the wellness center, pushing people to it was 1-800-NO-BUTTS at the time, but now Kick It California. And so we did a lot of promotion on quitting, tobacco treatment, just the fact that there is a new policy. And so that was a lot of the really like big stuff right in the beginning. As we've kind of like slowly moved out of it, we've done several events. We tried to keep our Earth Day going because that was the first event we had with our colleges. And it was really well received. So we keep doing like an Earth Day cleanup each year with our colleges to kind of keep the conversation about the policy in tobacco alive and to keep promoting. We know in this area and with this particular college, chewing tobacco and the oral nicotine pouches are very high, and you can't really enforce that so well because you don't want staff going around saying what's in your mouth. That would be really uncomfortable. And so we definitely have some more work to do with the oral nicotine. We're creating like banners to put up on campus for support and just education that they are very harmful. And so some of that's going to go in really strategic places like on the baseball field and in the rodeo center. And so we're being a little bit strategic about that implementation. And then now, because our grant only has 2 more years and the college has had this policy for a couple of years now, we really want to help them transition into a group of advocates that can keep this policy alive when we're not funding it anymore. And so, you know, we are recruiting for a advisory board. We're still working on getting some more student involvement with the junior colleges. Students change out like every 2 years, so it can be really hard. So we need an administrator that's going to continue with the recruitment and keeping this alive. And we're trying to provide them with as many resources as possible so that if they don't have an organization, say we're not around to call out and ask for resources such as like pamphlets, handouts, that they already have a lot of those things, particularly with the wellness center. And then of course the local LLA will be there for a long time. So we are being sure that they can support that as well in the future. So we're just trying to build kind of a self-sufficient, keep the policy alive, let people know that there are resources on campus to support them, mental health, wellness, tobacco treatment, and where they can go to find that has sort of been a major part of the implementation process.
Yeah, that's some great guidance and forecasting. I love that you're able to not only look forward with your funding, but also recognize that the local lead agencies or the county health departments will continue to have just funding as the nature of our tobacco tax here in California, and really trying to integrate the college into that community coalition so that they can feel supported, but not only feel supported, but also serve as advocates for other future work that happens in their community. I've heard, Amanda, I heard you mention this, and also Katie mentioned this, and then Chelsea, I think that you are the living example of student engagement and the power of student engagement. And something, Amanda, that you mentioned that we see that's a struggle with working with community colleges is that students are very transitional, that they might be there for 2 years or longer or significantly less than that. But the student voice is so critical, as we've really seen from the statewide level with student government taking a position on this issue. So can you all talk just about how you deal with student transition and how quickly there is some turnover with students, but how you really keep students engaged in this effort?
Because it's been helpful to have the student coalition that we have that we're able to fund through our California Tobacco Control Program grant. We have a Young Adults Fighting Tobacco Coalition. And so that gives our students that we recruit from the campus a place to continue to engage even after they transfer to a 4-year or they go wherever they're going to go. So we have several YAF students that were recruited at these campuses that are no longer at the campuses, but are still engaged in YAF. At that board meeting, we had a couple of those students come and give comments, and they said, I'm no longer a student here, but I used to be, and I was advocating for this then, and I'm back and I'm here and I'm going to keep showing up and advocating for this, because even though I'm not a student here anymore, I care about this. And one of them even brought up that her little brother is going to be going there next year, and she wants to make sure it's a good environment for him to go into. So that's been a blessing for us to have the YAFT Coalition for that purpose.
Yeah, former students definitely still have a voice on the campus. I think they really do listen to their alumni, and a lot of former students know incoming students. Like Katie said, it could be a sibling, it could be a friend. And so in a way, there's always just a pipeline of students coming through that want to be involved because they know someone that's on the coalition. And so they hear about us. And so they want to be involved in the movement. And so once you get one student, it's kind of a chain reaction, and you get more students out of that typically.
You all have been so much more successful than I have with student engagement. It's been definitely a challenge for us a lot. For anyone wanting to kind of start this process, we started with student services for all of our campuses, trying to find administration because they're connected with associated student bodies. And then they also have, I can't remember the name, it's different for every college, but they have like student advocates that they pay that do sort of like work. And most of our schools have something called base camp. I don't know if that's normal for every campus. But they work for the base camp, meeting student needs, and they're student workers. And so they are already really involved and connected on campus. And so that's who we mainly work with. But we have that kind of start introduction with the administration that oversee them to begin those conversations. And I think part of the reason why we've struggled with this so much is a lot of our campuses didn't have any of them for the last 2 years, and recruiting, because so many students were not living on campus, was really difficult. But now that they're in more flush with student workers, we're starting to see a little bit more student engagement where we weren't before. But that's another thing about Feather River, why I call them so special, is because through the pandemic, they had the best student engagement of any of the colleges I've worked with, or even like talked with other partners like Katie about. They had much better student engagement throughout the pandemic than some of the other schools.
That's great to hear. And I think it really speaks to some of the things we were talking about yesterday with this loneliness epidemic, and recognizing how can we create more spaces to invite people to be here to just belong, even if we're not talking about addressing tobacco use or doing advocacy work, but just pulling together people to have a sense of community and to connect and to do something meaningful. So I just love that you all are not only prioritizing the advocacy work to change the policy, but more so prioritizing ensuring that the young adults and that the students who are part of these campuses are doing that work. So I just want to do a quick reminder to people that if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat box. But I want to just have one last formalized questions for each of you. That here in California, we have still approximately 40 community colleges that are still working towards adoption of a smoke and tobacco-free policy. I know that you all are all at a different place with your journey. I want to recognize that college work is extraordinarily difficult, especially with community colleges, and how quickly people kind of come and go from those spaces. And so it can be a long journey to do. But just based on your experience, that the work that you've done in the past many years, what advice or guidance would you give to other advocates on the call in their policy efforts?
I think, like I said, the starting place with connecting, being student services is number one. I think that's a great place to start when you're, just getting going. They can also educate you on the process, because as we know, it's so different for every school of their policy process and how things get passed. So that's a great way to kind of start educating yourself on what this particular school looks like. And then, of course, like I think I mentioned earlier, was just patience. Not to say like don't keep pushing forward, but recognize that this process may not be exactly like what's in your scope of work, and you may have to do extra presentations or work with a different group, or you might have meetings happen that you don't know about and you have to respond to their concerns after the fact. So I think just keep pushing forward and give yourself grace, because it is a really difficult process and it is likely not always going to look like the activities that we have lined out for us in our funding. That's more of an advice for funded projects, I realize. If you are like a school administrator and you're pushing forward, look for your allies. Your allies may not always be able to come to a task force meeting once a month, or I think Katie said they were having them like every other week or something for some of the schools. But you may have big allies out there that are willing to speak up. They just don't have the time to come to a meeting. So find out who they are and see what they're willing to, how they're willing to participate. I think that's one of the biggest lessons learned that I had. Was for so long I was trying to recruit for our task force, and we did have a task force, but we weren't really catching those other allies because all we wanted them to do was come to a meeting, and that wasn't working for them. And so now we're able to figure out what those allies are able to do to help move this forward without just trying to get them to come to a task force meeting. So I think really highlighting them and utilizing the allies you have in different ways. So hopefully that's good.
Yeah, I would say persistence is key. Like all good things in life, it may take a long time. You just got to keep going. You have to keep the momentum going, or else it may stop. You have to find advocates, whether that's students, whether that's champions on campus, whatever you can do, whether that's just people in the community. Everyone has a voice on these campuses. I think people underestimate the impact communities around the campus have on the campus itself. And students are where the biggest advocates are at. That's where you're going to find the voices. That's where you're going to find the biggest people to make the biggest impact on those decision makers. So if you can get students involved, you're in a really good place. And yeah, I think that's it.
I don't feel like I have good advice. I don't know if I was cut out for this work, you guys. This policy stuff, it is so frustrating sometimes, and patience has never been one of my strong points. So it's been tough. So I've been like, let's all get together and let's advocate at the chancellor's office. Like, I'm so tired of working at the campus level. It takes so long. Like, let's get the chancellor's office to do something. They sent that dang resolution and the memo out like, yeah, you guys should all do this, but they didn't do anything else. Like, what else can they do? You know, maybe the chancellor's office can provide some funding for signage or give a deadline to the campuses of when they need to adopt these policies. So that's what I want to do. I want us all to work together to put pressure on the chancellor's office to like take more leadership on this so we can get that pressure from the top down happening as well. That's all I got.
Well, I appreciate that honesty, Katie. I feel you on the snail's pace. It feels like with some of these community colleges. I know one of the struggle, we talk a lot about this too, with people in California who continue to smoke. It's like they're the holdouts. They're not going to quit no matter what we do, increase taxes, make it impossible to smoke in certain spaces, ban flavors, all of these things are still going. But I do think that there's testament to show that it can be done. And even with the road bumps, you all are doing it. And we know that you're going to get there, and know as frustrating as it is,